Good day, everyone. I am Precious and Makiling, and today we will be discussing Chapter 2, which is the foundations of modern trade theory, comparative advantage. Now, this topic explains why countries trade with one another, why they export certain products while importing others, and how international trade benefits both the producers and consumers. Now, throughout this presentation, we will examine the contributions of important economists such as Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and John Stuart Mill. We will also learn how concepts like comparative advantage, production possibilities, and the terms of trade continue to influence the international trade today. By the end of my presentation, I hope we will understand not only the theories but also how these ideas apply in today's global economy. So let's begin. Alright, this chapter answers the following questions. But before we're going to discuss the theories, we will first understand the three major questions this chapter seeks to answer. So the first question is what constitutes the basis for trading? In simple terms, why do countries export some products while importing others? Why doesn't every country simply produce everything it needs? So the second question is at what terms of trade are products exchanged in the world market? This refers to the exchange ratio of price between traded products. For example, how much wheat should be exchanged for one automobile? So the third question is what are the gains from international trade? Specifically, how does trade improve the production, consumption, income, and overall economic welfare? And these three questions will guide our discussion throughout this chapter. Now, modern trade theory did not appear overnight, no? So it developed gradually as economists tried to explain how nations become wealthy and why countries trade with one another. Now, there are three major thinkers that shaped this theory: the mercantilist Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Each economist introduced new ideas that improved the previous theory. So let us begin with the earliest school of thought, the mercantilist. Alright, so this is the historical development of modern trade theory, and it starts with the mercantilists. So, during the period from 1500s to 1800s, Europe experienced the rise of powerful nation states. And economists during this period became known as the mercantilists. And according to them, a country's wealth daw magdepende siya sa amount of gold and silver that it possessed. Therefore, they believed that governments should encourage exports while limiting imports. Now, their objective was to maintain a favorable balance of trade, which means exports should be greater than imports. Why? Because exporting goods would bring gold and silver into the country, and as a result, governments will impose what we called as the tariffs, the quotas, and the restrictions on imported goods. However, this theory had an important weakness, no? The mercantilists, they assumed that the world's wealth was fixed now. In other words, if one country became richer, another country had to become poorer. And they viewed trade as a zero-sum game, where one country's gain was another country's loss. So, modern economists later proved that this assumption was incorrect because trade can actually benefit all the participating countries, no? Now, why did economists criticize mercantilism? The answer for this one is because it assumed again that the wealth is fixed and that trade only benefits one country. Now, modern trade theory shows that specialization and trade can increase total world production, allowing all countries to benefit. And this criticism led to the work of Adam Smith, who introduced a completely different perspective on international trade. Okay. Now, why nations trade absolute advantage? Now, this is now about Adam Smith's opinion. So Adam Smith is known as the father of modern economics. Now, unlike the mercantilist, no, Adam Smith believed that trade benefits everyone. According to him, countries should specialize in producing goods that they can produce more efficiently than other countries. Now, this idea became known as the principle of absolute advantage. But what does absolute advantage mean? A country has an absolute advantage if it can produce a country using fewer resources or less labor than another country. For example, suppose the Philippines can produce rice using fewer labor hours than Japan, and at the same time, Japan can produce automobiles more efficiently than the Philippines. So, under Adam Smith theory, the Philippines should specialize in rice, while Japan should specialize in automobiles. And after the specialization, they simply trade with each other. As a result, both countries produce more, consume more, and become better off. Now, Adam Smith also introduced the labor theory of value. According to this theory, labor is the only factor of production, no? And the cost of producing a product depends entirely on the amount of labor required. Now, although economists today know that production also depends on capital, land, technology, this theory became the foundation for later trade theories. Now, for example, imagine two students working on assignments. Now, ang isa ka student, maka-finish or makahuman siya og essay in 1 hour, while another takes 3 hours. Now, the first student has an absolute advantage because they require less time to produce the same output. No? So that's absolute advantage. Now, Adam Smith's theory explained many trading situations. However, one important question remained unanswered. And that question is, what happens daw if one country is better at producing everything? No? Would trade still be beneficial? So this question will be answered by David Ricardo. Alright, a while ago we discussed why nations trade into absolute advantage. This time, we're going to discuss why nations trade comparative advantage. So, David Ricardo, no, improved Adam Smith's theory by introducing one of the most important ideas in economics, and that is the principles of comparative advantage. Now, Ricardo observed that even if one country is more efficient at producing all goods, trade can still benefit both countries. The key is not absolute efficiency now, according to him. Instead, it is relative efficiency or opportunity cost. Now, when we say comparative advantage, this means that a country should specialize in producing the good that it can produce at the lowest opportunity cost. Now, when we say opportunity cost, this refers to what must be sacrificed in order to produce one additional unit of another product. So, let me explain this with a simple example. Now, suppose si country A is better than country B at producing both rice and computers. Now, does that mean computer A should produce everything? According to David Ricardo, no. Instead, si country A should focus on the product where its advantage is greatest, and country B should specialize in the product where its disadvantage is smallest. No. So, by specializing and trading, both countries will still gain. Now, let's have a classroom example for us to better understand this concept. So, think of two classmates working on a group project. Now, ang isa ka classmate is better at both writing reports and creating PowerPoint presentations. However, they are specially excellent at writing. So the other classmate is not as good, but they are relatively better at designing slides. So instead of one doing everything, they divide the work. No? The project gets finished faster with better quality and less effort. That is comparative advantage. Now, this principle is still used today in explaining international trade. Countries export products in which they have comparative advantage and import products that other countries can produce more efficiently. Now, now that we understand why countries trade and how comparative advantage works, the next question is, how can we measure or illustrate comparative advantage? So economists answer this using the production possibility schedule, so also known as the production possibilities curve. And this will be the focus of our next discussion. Alright, now let us move on to one of the most important concepts in international trade, the production possibility schedule, also called as the production possibilities curve, or the PPC, or David Ricardo's original theory. No? This assumed that labor was the only factor of production. Now, however, according to the discussion of the previous reporters, not only si labor ang factor sa production. On the modern trade theory, we recognizes the countries also use resources, including the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And this production possibility schedule shows the different combinations of two goods that a country can produce when all of its resources are used efficiently. Now, think of it as a country's production limit. If one country is producing on the curve, all resources are fully utilized now. Now, if the production is inside the curve, some resources are unemployed or underutilized. Now, if the production is outside the curve, it means it is currently impossible with the existing resources and technology. No? So this model, kanisi production possibility schedule, it would help the economist analyze opportunity cost, comparative advantage, and the gains from the trade. No? So next, to understand comparative advantage, we need to understand the MRT, or what we call as the marginal rate of transformation. So the MRT, or the marginal rate of transformation, this measures how much of one product a country must give up to produce one additional unit of another product. Now, in simple terms, MRT is the opportunity cost of producing a good. Now, for example, if a country must sacrifice 2 units of wheat or rice to produce one additional automobile, then the opportunity cost of that automobile is 2 units of wheat. Now, on the graph, as we can see on the slide, the MRT is represented by the slope of the production possibilities curve. Now, the steeper the curve, the higher the opportunity cost, and the flatter the curve, the lower the opportunity cost. Now, the country with the lower opportunity cost has the comparative advantage in producing the good. Now, let's have another classroom example, Imagine you have only 2 hours available, and you can either study economics or prepare a PowerPoint presentation. Now, if preparing one PowerPoint presentation cost you 2 hours of studying, then the opportunity cost of the PowerPoint is the 2 hours of study time, Nemo. So that is exactly what the MRT measures. What must be sacrificed, to gain something else. Alright, so for this one, let's proceed directly to next slide in order for us to check the table, Okay. So we have here the table 2.4. This is the gains from specialization and trade and the constant opportunity cost. Now, let us look at the concrete numbers on the table, no, that proves how specialization and trade create real economic wealth. So, si table 2.4, it breaks down into two parts: the production gains from specialization and the consumption gains from trade. Now, before specialization, as you can see, both nations, we have United States and Canada, no, split their resources. No, the United States produces 40 O2s and 40 units of wheat, while si Canada produces 40 O2s and 80 units of wheat. Now, combined, the world output stands at 80 O2s and 120 units of wheat. But look or watch what happens when they specialize according to their comparative advantage. So, si United States shifted all its resources into manufacturing autos. So, nag-specialize siya into manufacturing autos. So, increasing its output to 120 autos and dropping wheat to 0 na. Since nag-focus man siya or gi-shift niya tanan niyang resources into producing autos. No? Meanwhile, or on the other hand, si Canada, gipour niya tanan resources entirely into agriculture and raising wheat production to 160 and dropping autos to 0. So, 0 ang iyang autos kay nag-focus siya entirely into pouring its resources into agriculture, no? So, by simply reallocating resources to where they are most efficient, total world production expands, no, by a net gain of 40 autos and 40 units of wheat. So, by specialization, no, by specialization, mas ming taas ang net gain, no, sa world, sa autos, both sa autos and sa wheat. So, the total world production expands by a net gain of 40 autos and 40 units of wheat. Now, the second part of the 2.4 table, or the second half, is it shows how this production breakthroughs translate into consumption gains. Now, through trade, both countries end up with more of both goods than they had before. So, makita man sab nato na mas daghan no ng ilahang production compared atong nag-divide sila. Like, both sila naghimo og autos, both sila naghimo og wheat, no? So, each nation enjoys a net gain of 20 additional autos and 20 additional nga units of wheat. So, this numerical evidence clearly demonstrate lang na international trade expands the global economic pie, making both the trading partners better off simultaneously. Alright, so this brings us to the core concept of consumption gains. So, when ang isa ka country operates in isolation, its choices are fundamentally restricted. So, in the absence of trade, a nation can only consume exactly what is capable of producing internally, no? Kung mawala si trading, si nation, capable lang siya of consuming unsa lang ang iyahang ma-produce internally. So, this means its consumption alternatives are strictly limited lang to points along its domestic production possibility schedule, where a country decides to land on the line depends entirely, no, on the unique tastes and preferences of its own citizens and markets. However, no matter how strong consumer demand might be, the country dili siya or they cannot break past that boundary on its own. And specialization and trade serves as the mechanism para ma-unlock nila yun na mga constraints, allowing the nation to consume a mix of goods that would otherwise be physically impossible to produce domestically. So, we also have here the distribution or distributing the gains from the trade. So, while we established that trade creates clear economic gains, no, an important question remains. how exactly are those gains divided between the trading nations? No? So this highlights a key historical limitations in classical economic theory. And a major shortcoming ni David Ricardo's original principle of comparative advantage is that dili niya ma-pinpoint ang exact na terms of trade, and the best explanation Ricardo could provide was establishing the outer boundaries or limits within which the trading ratio would eventually fall. So, to understand how the actual exchange rate settles between those limits, we have to look beyond the basic production cost and examine the market forces of supply and demand. Alright, so building directly on how boundaries are established, the theory of reciprocal demand explains the final exchange rate depends on the relative strength of each country's demand for the other product. So, if one nation's demand is exceptionally strong, the terms will shift in favor of its trading partner. So, to quantify this relationship, economists use the terms of trade estimates, no? Specifically, the commodity or the barter terms of trade. So, this measures the direct relationship between the prices a nation gets for its exports and the prices it pays for its imports. So, as shown in the formula, we calculate the terms of trade by dividing the export price index by the import price index and then multiplying by 100. So, tracking this ratio, this would tell us whether ang isa ka nation's trading position is improving or is it worsening over time, no? So next, now that we understand how countries benefit from trade in the short run, no, let us look at something even more important. We have the long-term benefits of trade, which economists call as the dynamic gains from trade. So earlier, we discussed static gains lang, which happens because countries allocate their existing resources more efficiently. Now, dynamic gains are different, no? They occur over time because international trade encourages countries to become more productive and competitive. So, when firms gain access to larger international markets, they earn higher profits. So, instead of simply keeping those profits, many businesses gina-invest nila ang ilahang profits into better machineries, improved na technology, employee training, and research and development. So, as a result, ang ilang mga workers, they become more productive, no? And ang ilahang production cost mag-decrease, and of course, their economy will continue to grow. And another important benefit is what we call as the economies of scale. This means that producing larger quantities of goods, no, would reduce the average cost of producing each unit. Now, think of a factory producing only 100 smartphones per day, and its production cost per phone is relatively high. However, if that same factory would produce 10,000 smartphones every day for the global market, many fixed costs are spread over more units, and because of that, the average cost of each smartphones became lower. So this is one reason, no, why international trade promotes economic growth. So while static gains became today's production, see dynamic gains, it helped countries become more productive in the future. Alright? So, how global competition led to productivity gains for US iron ore workers. So, kani siya nga example, this would demonstrate that international competition is not always harmful. Sometimes, competition actually encourages industries to become stronger. Now, during the early 1980s, no, ang United States naka-experience silang decline in steel production. And at the same time, countries like Brazil, no, they began exporting large amounts of iron ore to the United States. Now, because imported iron ore became more competitive, American mining companies nag-face sila og serious challenges, no? However, instead of giving up, many companies decided to improve the way they operated, no? They invested in new equipment, nag-reorganize sila ilahang mga work processes, and they trained their employees to perform multiple tasks instead of just one. So as workers became more skilled and companies became more efficient, productivity increased significantly. And in fact, productivity in the US iron ore industry nearly doubled na siya within a few years. So, what is the lesson from this example? It shows that international competition can motivate businesses, no, to innovate, improve efficiency, and become more competitive instead of remaining stagnant. So in other words, competition can become a driving force for long-term economic growth. So, kani siya nga example, this also teaches us another important lesson, na comparative advantage is not permanent, no? It can change over time. Alright? Now, we have here the changing comparative advantage as what have been mentioned a while ago. It can change over time. Now, it is very important to remember that a nation's comparative advantage is not permanently carved in stone because international trade alters dynamic productivity. Patterns of comparative advantage can and do change over time, no? So look at the graph on this slide. This is the same graph as we have been shown a while ago with the MRT, no? So in this slide, this compares the United States and Japan in producing autos and computers. Now, originally, the United States holds a flatter slope, no? Makita niyo mas gamay ang iyahang slope for computers, indicating lower opportunity cost. But look at what happens if productivity in Japanese computers industry grows at a much faster rate than it does in the US computer industry, no? As Japan becomes exceptionally efficient at making computers, its opportunity cost drops from an MRT, no? Marginal rate of transformation of 2.0 down to 0.5, no? Consequently, the relative opportunity cost of producing computers in the United States increases compared to Japan. So as shown by the shifting curves, the comparative advantage, no, for the United States naturally shift away from computers and moves toward the autos, no? So all the models we have discussed so far, nag-assume siya og straight line, meaning constant opportunity cost. But in reality, no, production is rarely that simple. So let us examine what happens under increasing cost conditions. Alright, so in the real world, no, constant opportunity cost are the exception rather than the rule. More commonly, nations operate under increasing opportunity cost. This means that as a nation produces more of a specific good, it must sacrifice increasingly largely amounts of another good to get additional units of the first product. So this economic reality, this gives rise to a production possibility schedule that is concave or bowed outward, no, from the diagram's origin, as you can see clearly on this slide. So outward siya, no? What does this happen? Or why does this happen, no? It occurs because factors of production are not perfect substitute for one another, and ang resources are not all of equal quality. When a nation expands production, it must eventually use resources that are less suited for that product, no? So on this concave curve, the marginal rate of transformation is no longer a fixed number. Instead, the MRT here is equals the absolute slope of the production, no? Or the absolute slope of the production possibility schedule at any particular point along the curve. So at point A, no, the slope is flat pa siya, no? Meaning the opportunity cost there is still low. But as you move down to point B, the curve becomes much steeper, no? Mura na siyag pakuan na, steeper. Meaning, you must sacrifice a massive amount of weight just to get a few more autos, no? So next. Alright, when we look at trade under increasing opportunity cost, the dynamics change in a very important way. So, under the constant cost, no, the nations completely specialize, meaning they shut down domestic production of their weaker product entirely. But under the increasing cost, comparative product prices are determined by a complex mix of both supply and demand factors. So, as a direct result, a country tends, no, to experience a partial specialization under increasing cost conditions. Now, look at figure 2.5, that is trading under increasing opportunity cost, no? Before trade, the United States produces at point A, no? And Canada produces at point A, no? The United States has a comparative advantage in autos, while si Canada is more efficient at wheat. So when trade opens up, each country reallocates resources to expand its production of its preferred goods. And the US moves from point A to point B, producing more autos. And si Canada moves from point A to point B, producing more wheat. However, notice that neither country goes all the way to the corner of the graph. And the United States continue to produce some wheat and Canada continues to produce some autos. And they specialize only partially. Now, let us look at the numerical breakdown of this specific scenario in the next table, no? To see how both nations still come out ahead. So next we have here, so this table, no, provides the exact mathematical proof of the gains from the trade under increasing cost or increasing opportunity cost. Now, if you look at section A, that is production gains from specialization, before specialization, si United States nagaproduce siya og 5 autos and 18 bushels of wheat, while si Canada nagproduce siya og 17 autos and 6 bushels of wheat. And combined, no, world production stood at 22 na autos and 24 wheat. Now, after specializing partially, no, the United States increases its auto output to 12 and Canada shift resources to boost wheat production to 13. Now, look at the final net world gain. Global output increases by 3, no? Global output increases by 3 autos, and 3 bushels of wheat. Now, si section B, kaning consumption gains from trade, this shows the consumption gains. After trading at an equilibrium ratio of 1:1, si United States nag-end up siya og consuming 5 autos and 21 wheat, while Canada nag-consume siya og 20 autos, no, and 6 wheat. So both countries nag-enjoy sila sa net gain in consumption without requiring any extra global resources. So the core reason here, they do not stop producing their less efficient good entirely, no, comes down to a natural lang na economic braking mechanism. So let us look at why partial specialization happens. So, why exactly do countries stop short of full specialization under increasing cost? The answer lies in how countries move during production. Increasing costs constitute a mechanism that forces cost in two trading nations to converge. No? So, when the United States, pag-expand nila sa ilahang auto production, ang ilahang domestic opportunity cost for autos, nagkahinay og kataas. Because it is drawing in less efficient resources. Conversely, si Canada, pag-reduce niya sa iyang auto production para mag-focus siya sa wheat, ang iyahang domestic cost for autos ming-ubos. Eventually, as the US specializes more and si Canada specializes less, the cost differentials becomes the two nations or between the two nations are completely eliminated. Now, the very moment kanina mga cost mag-match up sila perfectly, the basis for specialization ceases to exist, no? So the convergence lacks in partial specialization, ensuring nga both countries retain gihapon ang ilahang domestic mix of industries while maximizing their trade advantages. So, whenever we talk about industries expanding or contracting due to international trade, the public always raises one massive concern. What happens sa local jobs kung ingana? No? Na ay expanding and contracting due to international trade, no? Si public, mangutana siya, what happens to local jobs? No? Alright. So, the impact of trade on jobs. The relationship between the international trade and employment is highly debated gyud siya na topic. And the standard trade theory nagsuggest siya that the extent to which an economy is open, this influences the specific mix of jobs within an economy, but has very little effect on the overall level of employment. So, while trade can absolutely makakause siyang painful short-term dislocation in the certain uncompetitive sectors, it does not alter the long-term total number of jobs available nationwide. Now, look at the historical count, no? Or the historical chart on this slide, covering the several decades of US economic data. No? The solid line tracks imports as the percentage of GDP, which has risen, no, steadily since 1960. And the dashed line, yung mga broken lines, that tracks the national unemployment rate, which fluctuates, no, or up and down siya. Up and down due to business cycles and recessions. But it shows no upward long-term trend. No? So this empirical data proves that an increase in imports over the past several decades has not led to any significant trend in overall unemployment. No? Trade simply reallocate lang the labor from low productivity import industries to high productivity export industries. So up to this point, our models have used a simplified world of just two products and two countries. No? Now, let us expand our horizon to see how comparative advantage works in a multi-product reality. Okay. What happens when countries produce hundreds or thousands of different goods instead of just two? No? Kaina, ang atong ginahisgutan is two countries lang and then two different goods lang. Now, this time, let's see as to what happens if ang country mag-produce siyag hundreds or thousands of different goods instead of just two. So, the fundamental economic theory still holds up perfectly. So, Kung ang duha ka countries mag-produce siyag large number of goods, no? The operation of comparative advantage simply requires that the goods be ranked by their degree of comparative cost. Now, look at the spectrum diagram on the slide, no? This shows a hypothetical trade relationship between the United States and Japan. So on the far left, we have the chemicals and we have the jet planes, where the US comparative advantage is strongest. Now on the far right, we have the semiconductors, we have the semiconductors where the Japanese comparative advantage is strongest. And the goods in the middle, like the computers, the autos, the steel, fall along a relative cost gradient. So the final dividing line for what is exported and imported will depend on the wage rates and currency exchange values. Now, each country will export the products on the chain, which its comparative advantage is strongest, and import the products in which its advantage is weakest. So, not only do we handle products, no, in real world, but we also deal with hundreds of trading partners simultaneously. So, let us look at a multi-country trade framework. There. Okay. When many countries are involved in international trade, bilateral trade, meaning trade are restricted between just two nations, becomes highly inefficient. Instead, the home country will likely find it highly advantageous to enter into multilateral trading relations with a number of countries. So, we have there figure 2.8 on the slide, no? This elegantly illustrates this process of multilateral trade using the United States, no? Yaon si Japan and the OPEC. So instead of trying to balance trade perfectly with every individual partner, a nation can run a trade deficit with one country but pay for it by running a trade surplus with another. So in this specific diagram, si OPEC nag-export siya crude oil to Japan. And si Japan pays for that oil by exporting high-tech semiconductors to the United States. No? And finally, si United States, this completes the triangular trade circuit, no? By exporting advanced jet planes back to OPEC. So this multilateral flow, gi-ensure niya na ang resources are allocated efficiently across entire globe rather than being restricted by two-way trade barriers. But for this global resource flow to work seamlessly, resources must able to move freely out of declining countries. In practice, this faces a major hurdle known as the exit barriers. Okay, now we mentioned about exit barriers a while ago. Now, according to the foundational principle of comparative advantage, an open trading system maximizes welfare by channeling resources away from low productivity uses and toward higher productivity uses. Now, foreign competition naturally forces high-cost inefficient plants to exit the market. Now, leaving only the low-cost plants to operate in the long run. However, in the real world, this restructuring process can take a very long time because inefficient companies face significant exit barriers. So, instead of shutting down smoothly, failing companies often cling to market capacity by nursing along antiquated or obsolete plants. Now, why do they do this? Corporate exit barriers nag-include siyang high asset write-off cost, long-term labor union contracts, no? Environmental na clean-up liabilities, or political pressures and government subsidies that artificially this keep uncompetitive plants alive. Now, these exit barriers slow down the dynamic gains of trade and madelay niya ang economic renewal. However, despite these real-world friction points, does the data actually support, no, Ricardo's theory? Now, let us examine the empirical evidence. Okay, this one. So, this is the empirical evidence on comparative advantage. Now, to determine if the comparative advantage is just an elegant textbook theory ra ba siya, or a real-world fact, the economists have conducted an extensive empirical testing. So, look at the scatter plot on the slide, no? Scatter plot siya na nag-display sa real-world data for 33 different industries nga nag-operate between United States and Japan. Now, the vertical axis there, this measures or that measures the relative exports, while ang horizontal axis diraa, this tracks relative unit labor cost. Now, this data or this scatter plot reveals clear, undeniable negative correlation. As you move toward the right, no, along the horizontal axis, meaning US unit labor cost rise relative to the Japanese labor cost, and US exports drop off sharply. So this perfectly correlates with a downward movement along the vertical axis. So this empirical evidence proves that relative labor costs and productivity are direct drivers, gid siya, of global trade patterns, and this validates Ricardo's core insights. Now, however, modern critics gihapon argue na today's economy is vastly different from the 19th century. So this brings us to a major contemporary debate na si comparative advantage ba still mag-apply pa ba gihapon siya in the face of widespread job outsourcing? No? So next, we have here the question. Does comparative advantage apply in the face of job outsourcing? Now, for decades, mainstream economists have firmly maintained that countries, on balance, gain substantial net benefits from free trade. So, the traditional view states that if each nation specializes in what it does best, no, everyone would enjoy lower prices and higher levels of consumption. But critics point out a major flaw when applying this old theory today. When David Ricardo originally formulated this theory, major factors of production like the climate, the soil, no, the geography, and the workforce were geographically fixed and could not easily move to other nations, no. In today's highly globalized digital economy, vital resources like the advanced technology, the financial capital, and innovative ideas can easily shift, no, around the globe in seconds lang. And critics argue that comparative advantage is severely weakened if production resources can simply migrate to wherever costs are lowest, which in today's world means na flowing to a handful of nations with abundant cheap labor. Now, if resources are perfectly mobile, some critics warn that trade ceases to be a win-win game, turning into a harsh scenario where some nations win big and others lose entirely. Now, to evaluate this claim, let us look objectively at both sides of the outsourcing debate, starting with the arguments presented by its proponents. So we have here the advantages of outsourcing. So despite the intense political backlash, proponents of outsourcing strongly maintain that offshoring services and production creates a powerful win-win situation for the global economy. How exactly did this benefit the home country? So first, outsourcing drastically reduces operating costs for domestic firms. And this cost savings are passed down directly to consumers in the form of significantly lower prices for goods and services. Second, by outsourcing, routine or the low value tasks, domestic companies can reallocate their capital and high skilled labor toward cutting-edge research, development, and high-value innovation. And furthermore, the income generated in developing nations like India or the Philippines creates booming new middle-class consumers who in turn would buy high-value exports from developed nations. Now, therefore, proponents argue it expands the global economic pie. However, we cannot ignore the real economic pain caused by this shift. Now, let us examine the heavy economic burdens that outsourcing places on domestic workers. Alright, so we have the burdens of outsourcing. While outsourcing boosts corporate profits, and lower consumer prices, it places a heavy burden on certain segments of the domestic workforce. So far, the public debate has focused heavily on the number of jobs lost. But economists argue that the long-term risk to wages may be far more significant. Because over the past 3 decades, the wages of low-skilled American workers, specifically those with a high school education or less, have decreased significantly both in real terms and relative to skilled workers with college degrees. And initially, a combination of rapid technological change and the outsourcing of manufacturing caused the demand for a low-skilled American workers to decline. No? Okay, but if we could go back to the slide, showing the impact on the jobs, or employment, the outsourcing of high-skilled service jobs such as computer programming, actuarial science, the financial analysis, this threatens to shift white-collar demand to highly educated cheaper substitutes in Asia. So this expansion of offshoring, this would places downward wage pressures on college-educated domestic professionals. So, given this intense global wage pressures, is it still possible for domestic manufacturing plants to survive at home? So, let us conclude my discussion with a sample as to how some companies are thriving without offshoring. Alright, so to wrap up my discussion on this topic, it is inspiring to look at how certain domestic manufacturers continue to prosper immensely, by keeping their production strictly local. So for example, here, some US manufacturers prosper by keeping their production in the US lang. So instead of chasing cheap global labor, these successful companies focus heavily on the dynamic gains of trade, maximizing advanced automation, utilizing specialized local supply chains, and maintaining strict quality control. So, by keeping production close to their primary consumer markets, they eliminate massive international shipping costs, they avoid complex logistical disruptions, and respond instantly to changing customer preferences. Their success proves, that the foundational principles of comparative advantage is rooted in maximizing productivity, innovating relentlessly, and minimizing relative opportunity cost. Now, this remains the driving force behind the wealth creation in the modern global economy. So, thank you so much for listening. I hope we understood and we get lessons with my discussion. So once again, I'm Precious Ann Makiling and thank you so much.